On September 30th, 2026, the state of Tennessee is scheduled to carry out one of the most closely watched executions in its modern history. The woman set to die has spent more than 3 decades behind bars. Her name has appeared in court filings, appeals, documentaries, and debates over capital punishment. For some, she represents calculated cruelty. For others, she represents the complexity of youth, trauma, and punishment. Her name is Christa Pike. At 18 years old, she committed a murder so brutal that it shocked Knoxville and reverberated across the country. She became the youngest woman on death row in the United States at the time of her sentencing. If her execution proceeds as ordered, she will become the first woman executed in Tennessee in more than 2 centuries, and the only person in the state's modern death penalty era to be executed for a crime committed at 18. This story begins long before the courtroom, before the confession, before the night of January 12, 1995. It begins in a childhood marked by instability, addiction, and anger. The kind of environment that shapes a person long before they understand the consequences of their choices. But while background explains context, it does not erase action. And on a cold January night in 1995, action turned into something irreversible. Chapter 1. A Life Formed in Chaos, Christa. Gail Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia. Her early years were not defined by structure or safety. Her mother struggled with substance abuse and unstable relationships, often prioritizing her own survival over stability for her child. Christa moved frequently between relatives, living in environments that lacked consistency and emotional security. She later described her childhood as abusive and neglectful. Accounts of early trauma emerged during her trial, presented by the defense as evidence of psychological damage that began long before the crime. Exposure to drugs and alcohol came early. By 9 years old, she was already using marijuana. By 12, she was drinking heavily. Discipline was inconsistent. Supervision was minimal. School did not anchor her. She fell behind academically and struggled behaviorally. Teachers saw defiance and disengagement. At home, conflict escalated. Her father eventually forced her out due to ongoing drug use and instability. Without a stable foundation, she drifted between placements and juvenile programs. None lasted. She dropped out of school in the 9th grade. By the time she reached late adolescence, she carried resentment and volatility that had been building for years. She felt rejected, unwanted, replaceable. Those feelings shaped her relationships, especially romantic ones, where attachment quickly became obsession. When she learned about Job Corps, a federal residential program designed to provide vocational training for disadvantaged youth, it appeared to be a structured escape. The program offered housing, education, and the possibility of independence. In 1995, at 18 years old, she enrolled at the Knoxville Job Corps Center to study computer programming. The campus was meant to remove young people from destructive environments and give them a second chance. For many, it worked. For Christa Pike, it became the setting of tragedy. Chapter 2. Obsession Takes Root. On her first day at the Knoxville Job Corps Center, Christa was quiet and guarded. She did not easily open up. She observed the social landscape before stepping into it. Sitting beside her in class was a 17-year-old student named Tadaril Ship. He initiated conversation. That small gesture carried weight. Within days, they were spending significant time together. Within weeks, their relationship deepened into something intense and exclusive. To Christa, Tadaril became more than a boyfriend. He became protection, validation, and identity. She later described him as the first man who made her feel valued rather than disposable. That sense of belonging became central to her emotional world. Together, they explored the occult. They wore pentagram necklaces and spoke about Satanism. Some later described it as teenage rebellion wrapped in symbolism. Others believed it reflected deeper fascination with darkness and control. Regardless of interpretation, the imagery and rhetoric escalated alongside their emotional intensity. In the same computer programming class was another student, Colleen Slemmer. Colleen had arrived months earlier, hoping the program would help her rebuild her life. She was described as friendly and approachable. She interacted with classmates, including Tadderell, in ordinary academic settings. To most observers, their conversations were harmless. To Christa, they became a perceived betrayal. Jealousy slowly hardened into fixation. She interpreted glances and conversations as threats. Friends later insisted that Colleen had no romantic interest in Tadderell. The accusations existed primarily in Christa's mind. In the weeks leading up to January 1995, Christa's language became more extreme. She told at least one friend that Colleen needed to be killed. She framed it in ritualistic language, suggesting a sacrifice aligned with their occult interests. Whether she believed in the symbolism or used it as theatrical justification, her intent was serious. On January 5, 1995, she stated clearly that she intended to kill Colleen. The statement was not dismissed as fantasy. It became preparation. Chapter 3: The Night Everything Ended. On January 12, 1995, the plan moved from words to action. Christa recruited Tadderell's ship and another student, Shadala Peterson. The strategy was simple. Present reconciliation as an olive branch. Offer marijuana. Suggest stepping off campus to talk privately. Christa armed herself with a box cutter borrowed from the center and carried a small utility knife. The presence of those tools indicated forethought. They were not objects found by chance. At approximately 8 p.m., the group left the Job Corps campus and walked toward a secluded area near an abandoned steam plant on the agricultural campus of the University of Tennessee. The location was isolated and dark. Few people passed through at that hour. Once there, the attack began abruptly. Christa struck Colleen and slammed her head into her knee. When Colleen attempted to flee, Tadderell chased her down and dragged her back. Shadala acted as a lookout. The assault lasted between 30 and 60 minutes. Colleen was slashed repeatedly with the box cutter. Deep wounds cut into her throat and back. Her clothing was partially removed. A cloth was forced into her mouth to stifle her cries. Forensic analysis later confirmed numerous defensive wounds on her arms and hands, indicating sustained resistance. During the attack, a pentagram was carved into her chest. The violence escalated in waves. Jealousy and rage fueled it. The assault was not a single blow, but a prolonged series of acts. The final strike came when Christa lifted a large piece of asphalt and brought it down onto Colleen's head with devastating force. The impact shattered the asphalt and fractured the skull beneath it. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Afterward, Christa removed a fragment of Colleen's skull and kept it in her jacket pocket. When she returned to campus around 10:15 p.m., she reportedly went directly to another student's room and described the murder in detail. She displayed the skull fragment as proof. Witnesses later described her demeanor as animated and detached, smiling as she recounted what had happened. The following morning, university employees discovered Colleen's body near the agricultural greenhouses. The scene stunned investigators. Within 2 days, arrests were made. Christa Pike waived her Miranda rights and provided a 46-page confession. In it, She acknowledged her role but claimed the situation spiraled beyond intention. She referenced jealousy and anger. At times, she claimed to have heard voices. The prosecution viewed the confession as confirmation of premeditated murder. Chapter 4: Trial, Sentence, and Years on Death Row. The trial began in March 1996 in Knox County. Prosecutors presented evidence of planning, prior threats, recruitment of accomplices, weapons carried to a remote location. They emphasized the brutality of the assault and the carving of the pentagram as evidence of deliberate cruelty. The defense presented testimony about Christa's childhood abuse, substance exposure, and psychological instability. They argued that she was emotionally damaged and immature despite her legal adulthood. They sought to humanize her, framing her actions as the product of trauma and manipulation. The jury deliberated. On March 22, 1996, Christa Pike was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. On March 30th, she was sentenced to death by electrocution. At 20 years old, she became the youngest woman on death row in the United States. In the courtroom, she collapsed and cried when the sentence was read. Her co-defendant, Tadaril Ship, received life imprisonment with the possibility of parole because he had been 17 at the time of the crime and was therefore ineligible for the death penalty under Tennessee law. Shadala Peterson pleaded guilty as an accessory after the fact and received probation. The disparity in sentences would remain a point of controversy for decades. Christa maintained that she did not deserve to die for the actions of 3 individuals. The state maintained that she was the instigator and primary aggressor. Life on death row brought isolation and routine. Appeals moved through state and federal courts. Arguments focused on mental health evaluations, jury instructions, constitutional standards, and evolving interpretations of youth and culpability. In 2001, while incarcerated, Christa attacked another inmate with a shoelace, attempting to strangle her. She later claimed prolonged harassment provoked the assault. Prosecutors argued it demonstrated ongoing violent tendencies. The incident damaged efforts to portray her as rehabilitated. Years passed. Governors changed, execution protocols shifted, legal standards evolved. Still, her sentence remained. Chapter 5: The Scheduled Execution. On September 30th, 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court issued an execution order, setting her death for September 30th, 2026. The execution is scheduled to take place at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, the site of Tennessee's execution chamber. Because the crime occurred before January 1st, 1999, Christa Pike may choose between lethal injection and electrocution. The date marked the culmination of 3 decades of legal proceedings. Her case stands at the intersection of youth, trauma, and capital punishment. She was legally an adult at 18, yet still in late adolescence. Over 30 years have passed since the crime. During that time, she has lived under the certainty of a death sentence. Colleen Slemmer never had the opportunity to age beyond 18. The brutality of the crime remains central to the state's position. The prolonged torture, the carving of the pentagram, the souvenir taken from the victim's body. Those details shaped both the jury's decision and the lasting public memory of the case. As 2026 approaches, the execution order transforms from paper to inevitability. The legal system has run its course. The sentence stands. Consequence and closure. On January 12, 1995, 4 young people walked away from a residential campus in Knoxville. Only 3 returned. One life ended in violence near an abandoned steam plant. Another life entered a cell where it would remain for decades. Families on both sides were left with grief shaped in different forms. When September 30th, 2026 arrives, the state of Tennessee may carry out its judgment against Christa Pike. The act will close a legal chapter that has remained open for more than 30 years. The crime cannot be undone. The loss cannot be restored. The execution will not rewrite history. It will finalize it. The story of Christa Pike remains one of the most disturbing and consequential criminal cases in Tennessee's modern era. A case rooted in jealousy, escalation, brutality, and the irreversible weight of consequence.